Assalamu alaikum. My name is Khadija Haneef and I'm an American literature student, and this topic which I've chosen for my project is Rise of Realism. So for the Rise of Realism, we have to know what realism is. So realism started at the time of Civil War, and it eventually the reaction of the Romanticism, and people around were like, why we celebrate nature and imagination when there's a lot of brutality and a lot of chaos going on in the society. So why we not discuss what is going on at the moment? So the age of realism in American literature is from 1865 to 1914. Basically, realism started at the late of 18th, and it goes to the earlier of 19th century, and then it remained to the 20th century. So the peak or the rise of realism was eventually the early of the 19th century, and that's why the realism can also be related to the glided age, because it was the rise of realism and it was a time where the realism was very much relevant. So this age leads society to the new beginning, where people analyze things through realist perspective, that eventually what is realist perspective and what reality is. So to go into the depth of realism, we have certain following points, and the realism injects many questions in society about specifically about the literary art and culture. So those questions which really realism bring in the society was like, how should literature respond to the social problem of its time, and how language capture what is real. And the basic question was, eventually the basic conflict between was the real and fantasy, that what should count as real and what should count as fantasy, and how literature can help on competing perspective on reality, that what is going on in society and how should literary arts can convey this message of what the brutality and the chaos going on around the society. So they also, critics also believes that literature should expand its form of writing beyond fiction and poetry. Like the time for romanticism ends, there should not be any romantic poetry or fascinating fiction. There should be something like autobiography, social commentary, or the indulgement of history. And there's this volume which entered into the literature, the Norton Anthology of American Literature, that you should tell the people about the history of ours and the folk tales, and specifically the social commentary, that what is eventually going on and how people need to deal with all that chaos and reality of society. So basically, in one of those critics, Howells was another critic of it, and he believes that democracy should enter in literature, and it is a high time for literature to talk about what is real and what is not. So one of his sayings says that democracy in literature wishes to know and tell the truth. So eventually the realism question about that, do not give people an illusions and delusions. Just tell them what is reality. Just tell them what is the truth, that the war, the chaos, the miserable thing, and the vague happening out. You should tell them that, despite of telling them the fiction and poetry and everything else. So most prominent writer of realism are Mark Twain, Henry James, and Charles Dudley Warner. Mark Twain's essays are very much famous, and they are one of the pioneers of realism, and so as Henry James and Charles Dudley. So they really played their part well in shaping realism. So the writer which I have chosen for the realism is Henry James. Henry James was an American author and critic, and he served the literary world from 5th April 1843 to February 1916, and he considered as among the greatest novelists in English language, and he's basically considered as a key transitional figure between literary realism and literary modernism. So eventually the writer of realism and modernism as well, and his writings really have a very they really usually don't have plots, but they are very layered writings, and they are very vague plots, and the messages in the text which convey the message of how vague and how meaningless life be in chaos and brutality. Then the text which I've chosen from his literary works are The Real Things and the Other Tales. Is a short story, and the story revolves around a portrait artist and a couple who demands from him to sketch them as models. So the artist really eventually hires the couple, Major and Mrs. Monarch, as their model, and they were like doing work. The major themes of the story is a parents versus reality, the concealed life, and ugly versus beautiful. Now how, and the three of these themes, they are related to the basically to the art, that how art should portray what real and what not to the people of its society. So the very first theme, which is the art versus reality, it says that real thing, as suggested by the title, we appear then the reality. That beautiful couple were eventually actors, and still they don't have feeling, and they were not portraying the way they has to be. So they were actors, and they were hiding their reality, and yet they could not feel the immense of their own royalty and everything else. Then the point is the concealed life. The real thing is not the concealed life is basically majorly related to the art, and it says that the real thing is not actually better than seeing an image of something presented in a way we expect. Art does not so much imitate life as conceal life, present it in a way we would like it to be. So he said that art should not imitate life so much. It should not present it as a concealed life. It should always present it like there is some reality, and you should know about that reality. Then the theme is ugly versus beautiful. Now the artists already have models. Those were ugly, but the couple that came to the artist, they were pretty ones, but they could not feel or imagine the portrait, or they could not behave in that way. So the artist was very much determined that if he would hire the ugly people, they would perform better than them. So it is always about the question of how we appear and how we really are, and we try to appear very nice, very amazing, but in reality there are some flaws, there are some chaos going on, which you should not hide so much, that you should not exaggerate it so much. So that was it all about the real things, that what are the real things in you. Then as I above mentioned, then Henry James presents the story of vague plot with multi-layer writing that eventually represents the age of realism. Eventually the realism is all about that stop being stop fictionizing the stories, and stop exaggerating them, and tell the truth, that what is going on in society, that there's chaos going on, brutality going on. So tell the truth and known the truth. That was eventually the essence of realism and the essence of its writers. And then in the end, ma'am, thank you so much for being so cooperating, and as I already told you in my other project, that we are lucky to find you, but we are also unlucky to not find you before or early, and I really miss you, and I will miss you too, and I wish we will bump into you earlier, and we will have a better experience than this one. But eventually it was really nice. You really spoon feed us through modal activities, and every time you've been so amazing, teacher. So thank you so much for bearing us. Thank you so much for bearing all the hurdles we created for you. Thank you so much.